Like a fat guy putting on shots, you split your sides at Thursday Thoughts. Welcome to this week's edition of Thursday Thoughts with Eddie Anchor. I'm your host, Eddie Anchor. I'm going for a world record compressed version this week so I can start my long weekend as well as everybody else. So, let's get straight into it. Bang! Bunga versus Tom. Talk about match of the round. This is the week where two become one. From this battle between two undefeated keyboard warriors will emerge an undefeated champion who will be one step closer to that elusive crown. This is how they see this matchup. This, on the other hand, is how the rest of us see it. Too much? Perhaps. Hilarious? Definitely. Despite Tom's flying start to the year, I find it tough to go past the league leader, who is making everyone his bitch to this point. Bunga by 94. Hayden versus Ben. Now, a bold statement was made midweek by Ben that if he got the pickups he was after, he wouldn't lose another game for the season. The fact neither of his pickups are actually playing this week, I suspect he has a very long sleeve full of aces to delve into, because he's going to need them. Hayden will be careful not to let the opportunity of an easy kill slip through his grasp, as a win will assure him of moving up into second position on percentage. Hayden by 240 points. Now, we move on to Andy versus the commish. After Andy's season was short-circuited by a guy in a flannelette shirt last week, he has had to reprocess the numbers to try and get things back on track. He will be further fired up by the commissioners' lineup after they scored through the roof, only to be pipped on the line again. With further injuries cruelling his chances this week, with a mystery foot injury to Daniel Wells, it could spell the death knell of a once promising season for the commish. I'm backing the commish in though. His incredibly unlucky season of close losses is due to end eventually. Andy to have a few mid-game injuries for a change, and the commish to win by 39 points. Chris versus Steve. Now, when Paul Simon first sang "Slip Sliding Away, Slip Sliding Away," he must have seen this match coming far into the future. Because it's just like both of these seasons are going, they're slip sliding away. While a feeling that can only be considered pride adjacent is all that Chris is playing for at the moment, Steve is watching his season fall like so many tears from his eyes. Like two ships passing in the night, it only seems a matter of time before Chris gets his first win and lets Steve settle at his natural level at the foot of the ladder. Now, based on recent scores, I think Chris is going to win by 100 this week, and on you go, Steve. Down, down, down. Callum versus Robbo. In an off-the-record interview earlier this week, Callum was quoted as saying, "I'm going to fuck Robbo up this week." Hardly the standard politically correct approach we've come to expect from Cal, but he certainly has gotten his point across. The mullet of Robbo has recently been trimmed, but unlike Samson, it has worked wonders for his results after he posted a huge score last week and rocketed up to 7th on the ladder. With North Melbourne likely to have a tough time in WA, Callum is likely to struggle against his West Australian opposition as well. Robbo to bitch slap Callum across the Nullarbor by 130 points. Now, we move on to Matt versus Tricky. If you have ever wondered what it'd be like to see an ambulance race against a hearse, look no further. With Tricky's team on life support and Matt's team clinically dead, these two may struggle to fill their sides this week with the number of injuries between them. So, for any weekend warrior who's ever wanted a game in the big league, make sure you bring your boots to the game this week, because you're every chance of getting picked to play for one of these teams. With Paddy Dangerfield getting back to red hot form, I find it impossible to go past Matt. Paddy by 40. Matt's team by 40. Actually, I was right the first time. Paddy by 40. Now, as we head to the ladder, we can see that Bunga and Tom are both undefeated after 5 rounds, sitting atop the lot of us. Just waiting for the slip up in behind them is Hayden, who is starting to justify his early season hype surrounding him. At the other end of the scale, though, is still Chris and Callum battling it out to try and avoid the spoon. In Callum's case, he could be set to open up his own soup kitchen because he could be adding a second to the set. Now, we move on to Free Agent of the Week. I'm going to go for one completely from left field that even I couldn't have seen coming last week. I watched Will Hoskin Elliott play last year in a match where he kicked 5 goals and thought, this kid can seriously play. Since then, he's had a few points of brilliance, but nothing substantial. Last week when I was watching him play, he appeared to be genuinely doing the things that are needed to take that next step. And in a match I think GWS are a genuine shot at winning, I think he will be a key part of it this week. He banged in 100 odd last time against the Gold Coast, and I think he may bob up and have a feast of points again. Just to make a point of how big a leap this has been to keep my streak of good tips going, this kid is only averaging 34 for the season, so I'm taking a big leap of faith on Will Hoskin Elliott. And another one. Being Anzac Day today, depending on when you're actually going to view this, I've got a second free agent of the week for you guys to look out for. If he isn't named the sub, Shane Savage, the only player with Kiwi heritage playing in his home country for the Saints this week, will be out to make a huge impression. With a swag of the ball last week in the VFL and a massive 100-plus average against the Lions, he could be the big pickup this week. Now it's time for another instalment of Eddie Anger. Alright, the bump. Well, I spoke about it a few weeks ago, and it would seem things have only gotten worse since then. The game is a victim of itself here, unfortunately. The way the game is played now, everybody gets up in arms when a heavy hit is laid on a player who hasn't got the ball in his hand. That's because those hits have almost been completely eradicated from the game. When things happen so rarely, it's no wonder the players are getting blindsided. They don't expect it to happen anymore, so they aren't on the lookout for it, and they're not even bracing themselves when it happens. I don't want to sound like one of those dinosaurs who sits back sipping their VB and ranting on about the good old days when men were men and football was football. While the huge hits and the giant punch-ups made for a great highlights package, it made the game look like nothing more than a sideshow, to be honest. The world has changed, and so has the game. If you want to see grown men punch each other in the head, head down to the Smithy Hotel at about 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. Then you'll see some blokes punch each other in the head. Or better yet, turn on Sunday and watch the UFC, where they can do it professionally. Now, players have gotten a lot bigger and a lot stronger than ever now, and they can inflict some serious damage at the highest level. And we don't want to see anybody not wearing a Carlton Guernsey get seriously hurt. I kid, obviously. Don't want to see anybody getting hurt. Where they are actually falling over in the AFL isn't the rules. It's the fucking tribunal. Too often are they looking at the end result rather than the action that caused it. In the Nate Fyfe case, for example, a bloke ended up with stitches in his head from an accidental head clash. Because of those stitches, he gets 2 weeks. Richie Douglas, later hard shepherd. In my opinion, it was the impact with the ground that would have done the damage, not the actual bump. 2 weeks because the guy was actually knocked unconscious. Now, the other side of the coin, Daniel Merritt intentionally smashed a guy in the face with his elbow, trying to be malicious, only gets 2 weeks because minimal damage was actually done. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone shot me in the chest and I was lucky enough to live, the end result is irrelevant. It's the action and the intent that's important. He was trying to kill me. Take the end result out of it and we might actually clear up some of these crazy suspensions. And that's Eddie Anger. Now it's time for another instalment of Eddie Mail. Well, our old mate Pat was at it again. The email he sent in though was rather long, so rather than read it all out for you, I'll dot point and answer the questions for him. First question, where are the Wizards' predictions? In answer to that, the segment was hardly worth the oxygen it took to ask him the question, so that one's been given the arse. Now, Question 2. You, Eddie, are a genius at picking 1 week specials for your free agent picks. Can you give me your top 5 for the week for my own fantasy league? Well, we've already given you Will Hoskin Elliott and Shane Savage. For your own league, some unique picks to add to that list are Michael Riscatelli against the GWS, Lewis Jetta against the Demons at the MCG, and last but not least, Chris Yarran against West Coast at Subiaco, where he tore them to shreds on the open spences last week. Now, Pat, you've really put me under the griller this week, so pick through the bones of that, and fingers crossed all 5 of them come in for you. Pat's last point was, where the fuck was my theme song at the end of the show like you promised last week, you lying arsehole? Now, I might have paraphrased that a little, but that was pretty much what he meant. Well, my apologies for last week. The episode ran extra long, and we couldn't cop an extra 2 minutes runtime on the end of it just for that shitty song. But this week, without fail, it will be there. Thank you very much for the email, Pat, and keep them coming. It's time for this week's final segment, Eddie Anker's Weekly Wanker. Now, this week's Weekly Wanker is probably worthy of winning it every single week, but due to award restrictions, every player must be given at least 1 nomination per season, so we need to spread it around a little. Since we're a little thin on the ground with wankers this week, and this particular person has been more annoying than normal, the time has come to pull the trigger. Sometimes we get into verbal jousts and heated arguments. Words and sentences tend to get a little mixed up and lost in translation. This happens to everybody. We all do it. For this week's wanker, it happens all the time. In fact, you could probably call it his MO. For this man, predictive text and spell check just don't even get a run. After this week's efforts though, enough is enough. He needs to be exposed for the wanker he is. We're now going to head to our next clip, A Week in the Life of Bunger. We call this Bunger's Blunder. For an entire week of banter and abuse that can only be described as bad word salad, Bunger, you are Eddie Anker's Weekly Wanker. Get it together, mate. That's all we have time for this week. I hope you have a wonderful Anzac Day and enjoy the footy. Remember to be respectful during the last post being played in all games. These are the privileges our current and former countrymen fought to maintain. See you all next week.
Thursday night is here again. A little after 10:15, the wife's asleep, the children too. That leaves a man with one thing to do. Bring out the laptop, it's time for your date. Settle in and learn your fantasy fate. With a bang, Eddie welcomes you in. He turns his hat, then it's time to begin. The week that was, you might rather forget. Who is the dud and who is the jet? Start the weekend with a dose of the anchor, and laugh your ass off at Weekly Wanker. Like Federer down at the cots, here's your serve of Thursday thoughts. Like a hobo eating his watts, here's your fill of Thursday thoughts. Like a fat guy putting on shorts, you'll split your sides at Thursday thoughts.